right now. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. And here we are again. Just one more afternoon of brainstorms, insights, and discussions about marine forests. Welcome, all of you. So, Ana, they are all yours. Welcome, and thanks a lot, Sergio, for coming, and all our speakers of this afternoon.
Okay, thank you, Paulo. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon for those who are in Brazil. Good evening for those who are in Europe. I hope everyone is enjoying the second day of event. Thank you so much for your presence. I am pleased to be here today, hosting the fourth Fortaleza's Offshore Spring School and the second Floripa Spring Eco-School in Sustainability. My name is Ana Luisa. I am a laboratory technician at Labomar, UFC, and also a PhD student at UFC, the Federal University of Ceará. Today, we'll be introducing our lecturers, okay? I will be your mediator, so let's begin. Our lecturers will be Dr. Sergio Ricardo Floeter, Dr. Paulo Vassallo, Dr. Lorenzo Alvarez Philippe, and the PhD students Jacopo Borghese and Daniele Arduini. We will have 4 sessions, okay, with 30 minutes each. And at the end of the sessions, we will be open for questions, discussions, statements, and we want you all to feel free to participate, okay? I would just like to remind you guys that if you're having any problems with the transmissions, the links are always being updated on the official site of the event, on the event platform, right? So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Sergio Floeter. He is a professor at the Federal University of Santa Catarina and also the coordinator of the Marine Macroecology and Biogeography Laboratory. His lecture is entitled Fish Assemblages and Marine Forests, a very interesting topic. So please, Dr. Floeter, whenever you're ready.
While Sergio is organizing his presentation, I would like to reinforce that if you are at home and need a translation, we have simultaneous translation in another room, just because the internet is not working really very well in south of Brazil this morning. So I will put in the chat the link for the simultaneous translation, okay? Enjoy Sergio's talk.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here in this series of lectures. Thank you for having me here and inviting me. So I'll try to put some perspectives on fish assemblages on marine forests for you. Let me see here. Okay. As you all know, I will not be here dealing with the concept of marine forest, marine animal forest. You all know that already. I'm here to talk about fish that lives within these forests. And for instance, you may have this kelp fish living in kelp forests. We have fish everywhere, but in marine animal forests, I will concentrate on coral reefs. That it's my ecosystem that I study the most. So, of course, in the coral reef, you have all these connections with seaweed beds, with rhodolites, calcareous algae, and all of this. But I will be more focusing on the coral reefs per se. And in coral reefs all around the world, we have 6,500 species of fish that lives interacting with these ecosystems. So, and they are, as we all know, full of colors and different functions in the reef. I think tomorrow Mariana Bender will talk more on the functions, especially on functions of reef fish on coral reefs. But we have sharks, we have herbivores, we have all sorts of fish doing different interactions with the reefs. But I'll tell today. I'll just tell you some stories that I have been involved in my lab here, and a few questions more related to global view of diversity and functional aspects of reef fishes. For instance, since I was very young, I was questioning which fishes I am seeing here on reefs, on rocky reefs, on marine forests, gorgonians, and everywhere, and how many species I have been seeing. And then this was always my question since very early in my life, even before I entered university and my professional career. I was always looking at butterfly fish, for example, interacting with corals. What were they eating and how they were interacting? And then when I started my master's, my PhD, then I knew that I was born to large-scale patterns like biogeography and macroecology. But in the beginning of the century, I was looking for, with other colleagues, with a close eye on different species. So we started describing species here in the Brazilian coast that were thought to be the same species as Caribbean counterparts, but then we now know from genetic point of view and taxonomic and morphology that they are different species. Then we started doing checklists for Brazil. We are now working for more than 10 years, but I hope we are in the end of this story for publishing the first Brazilian reef fish book that it's in the making right now. And with all of these checklists and things and knowledge in the Brazilian coast, we started doing some biogeographical sectorization of the Brazilian coast. And after that, I started looking at the global patterns of biogeography and macroecology. So we have this paper here from my postdoc, and then we have other paper with different colleagues, but dealing in the Atlantic Ocean with the barriers for dispersal and how they shaped the biogeographical provinces within the Atlantic, and then we looked at the global scale. For instance, in this paper here led by Michel Kubik, published in PLOS One. But then I was not satisfied only with the biogeography we can have from today's how can I say, today's relationships of different biogeographical areas. And then we started looking at the biogeography in time, through time. The idea here in this paper, published in Biological Reviews a few years ago, was to look at getting all the molecular phylogenies we could get, and then try to slice in time. This is all related to molecular clocks within different families of reef fish. And then we started exploring these temporal patterns of the provinces, of the biogeographical provinces. And we could see the signature of, that was already our hypothesis, that we will see the signature of important events like the closure of the Isthmus of Panama, for example. We could have a signature of that event, and then we have the signature, the signal of the Tethyan assemblage before the closure of the Tethyan Sea, and then the separation of the Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific. But we could recover all of these signs. That was pretty cool. And it's interesting that the hotspots, the very hotspots, changed in time within the coral reefs of the world. And we also recovered the sign of the Atlantic separation after the closure of the Tethyan Sea. But anyway, so I worked in biogeography, this kind of evolution approach to biogeography. But I'm my team here, my lab, and since my PhD, we are always looking at fish community structure also, so with underwater visual censuses. And with this collection of data and with a networking with different scientists, we started looking at the macroecology of these trophic structures. For instance, in this work here, we deal with geographical gradients of marine herbivores. But then we started looking at the global scale in terms of functional biogeography, looking at the various functional traits of each species. And then in this work here with David Muyo, we worked on this idea of the redundancy of different biogeographical areas around the world. And now we have a paper just accepted last week that we will soon be published at Proceedings of Royal Society, that we looked at these kind of things like diet and body size and families in a global scale in terms of richness. If we in the x-axis here, we go for the richest places in the world, and this is the proportions of certain dietary groups. For instance, here the corallivore, the crustacivores. The crustacivores, they start diminishing with richness, while other groups like planktivores or the macro invertivores, they start getting proportionally more important as you go to richer places. And with body size, we have this kind of thing that smaller species are more concentrated in richer areas, while proportionally species that have larger body size are more concentrated proportionally concentrated in places that we have less richness. And and we also have another pattern that the families, it's interesting that the families, when we have a taxonomic look at it, the families are more or less equivalent in this richness gradient. This is something very interesting. So in terms of taxonomy, they go more or less equivalent. But in terms of diet and body size and other aspects of functional traits, they vary more. When we map this, we can see that, for instance, these microinvertivores, they are proportionally much more important here on the coral triangle than other places. We see that piscivores are more concentrated, more proportionally important here in Africa, in Brazil, in oceanic islands in the tropical Eastern Pacific. Plantivores are followed the same vertivores, but herbivores have another kind of pattern. So here is a zoom in this kind of patterns. Again, we see piscivores in more distant areas, more isolated areas from the coral triangle, while plantivores, for example, are proportionally more important in the center of biodiversity in the Pacific. In terms of body sizes, we see a concentration of smaller body sizes, as I said before, in regions that we have more diverse regions. And as we go to larger sizes, the map starts to change, and we have in more isolated places in the Atlantic or isolated islands like the Hawaiian archipelago, we have proportionally more larger species. This is to say that it's not that you don't have these large species in richer places, but this is just a matter of proportions in communities. And so this is, again, small sizes in richer and more complex environments related to the coral reefs, the marine forests, and that, and larger sizes in more marginal places. But then changing again the subject to, for instance, feeding preferences. This is something that in my lab here we are looking for in the last few years. So we started looking at the butterfly fishes in the Western Atlantic, their feeding preferences, again with underwater visual censuses, but also you'll see later that with cameras, with GoPro cameras, we started looking at smaller areas in the reef. But both with the cameras and with the visual censuses, counting fish, we started looking at species packing, for example. How many species you can have per 100 square meters in a reef all over the world. So this was something that was explored in this paper here by Diego Barnesh in Global Ecology and Biogeography. We looked at these kinds of things around the world, comparing visual censuses, and we looked at these species packing in different places of the world. As expected, more isolated places, you have less, and with marine forests or coral reefs, with less complexity and so on, less richness, you find less species per unit area also, comparing with places yet you have more diverse environments. And this is the same as you see here in these accumulation curves from the tropical Indo-Pacific, the Coral Triangle, and then other places in the Pacific. And then we come to the Atlantic here, the Caribbean, Brazil, and other oceanic and islands, isolated islands. And we have a very good correlation between fish species richness and coral richness, as you would expect of this relationship of fish and the marine forests. Again, here's it's another analysis, but the result was the same I showed in the map before, that we have in richer places like the Coral Triangle, we have the maximum body size. We have smaller species here, and we have larger species in poorer places, and these have repercussions for the geographical range and the way the communities assemble in these different areas, like the tropical Eastern Pacific, isolated, and then so on. This is the remote cameras we have been using all over the place to look at feeding interactions of fish within the benthic compartment, and also fish relationships in terms of agonistic interactions and things like that. So we looked at, for example, if we can find more interactions in the tropics, if this is really true, especially for the herbivores, the herbivorous fish. And we published this work by Guilherme Longo, showing that in the Western Atlantic, after looking at all these videos for a long time, analyzing it, we find that the feeding pressure of fish in the coral reef is much higher in places that we have a higher temperature. So it's related to temperature, as one could expect. Changing again the subject to more some phylogenetic perspective on the functional traits, we published this article in Biological Reviews, looking at in this case here, an example of looking at reconstructing, mapping on the phylogeny, the evolution of the certain diets, trophic groups. In this case here for labrids, but and we can see that when we have a whole clade that would be related to one kind of diet, and others with others, different diets, but we have some diet popping out in different places in the phylogeny. It's very interesting to map this and reconstruct this dietary preferences over time, evolutionarily speaking. We could map body sizes also, in kind of a conserved trait, evolutionarily speaking. Also, it's interesting that we have some clades that most species are bigger, and other clades that most species are smaller. But to wrap up here, I would like also to show you guys that we are having a lot of impacts, of course, in coral reefs. So, for example, this paper that just appeared, looking at the debris ingestion by herbivorous fish, plastic, and all these kinds of things. It's unbelievable what we are now finding in fish guts. And we can always think that we have, when we have a healthy state, we have the sharks, we have the large fish, but future scenarios are not that promising, with a lot of pollution, overfishing, and climate change. So we have to deal with all of these pressures right now. And in Brazil especially, we are now, for the first time, really have to worry about the lionfish invasion. And this picture here of the lionfish over a coral, this picture was taken yesterday in Fernando de Noronha Island here in Brazil. So they are really coming, unfortunately, and starting in the northeastern part, but we are now suspecting that they will in a few years invade our Brazilian coast here. But we will have to learn with all the experiences in the Caribbean and try to do as much effort as possible in the beginning of the invasion here. Now, I would just like to thank for all these years with lovely research colleagues that we have been working and doing all these works with the students and colleagues. So the main topics of my research here, as you saw today, biogeography, phylogeography, macroecology, trophic ecology, feeding behavior, functional ecology, and conservation. So here's my lab, the current funding from different projects, the supporters for a long time now. We have to always thank them all. And this is the website for my lab, the Marine Macroecology and Biogeography Lab. So thank you very much, and I will take any questions later on when we'll have our questions.
Thank you, Sergio. It was a wonderful presentation. I think now we are starting again to warm up our brains after the lunch. I expect all have lunched well. And what we have, let's go, Anna.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Flatter. What a great lecture, right? It is a really interesting and important subject that we all have to think about. It was really good to watch it. Thank you. And if the participants have any questions or statements, please feel free to comment. And remember, we will only be reading those comments at the end of all of the 4 lectures, all right? And now we are going to begin our second presentation, which will be given by Dr. Lorenzo Alvarez Philippe. He is a researcher at the Academy Unit of Reef Systems of the National Autonomous University of Mexico. And he's also the president and secretary of the Mexican Society of Coral Reefs. Dr. Lorenzo research is about coral reefs, ecology, conservation, biodiversity, ecological functioning, and he will present his lecture today, which is entitled Changing Geo Ecological Functions of the Coral Reefs and the Anthropocene. Dr. Lorenzo, feel free to start when you're ready.
Thank you, Anna. Are you seeing my presentation now?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay.
You just need to put in the full mode if you can, please.
It is in the full mode. You don't. Okay, so I have a problem then. I will unshare and share it again.
Yeah, I think you need to choose a different window or screen. Yeah. Now we are observing your PowerPoint.
Edit mode, I think.
Yeah, edit mode, that's it.
Okay, let me... Sorry, and we practice this.
No, no worries. Sometimes it's a kind of thing that put our brain upside down.
Is it working now?
Unfortunately, we are still observing your working mode. Yeah. The edit mode, yeah.
I think that I don't have option to select a different screen. I think that you need to take the power to the side and then give it again to me so I can share.
No, it's with you. I will change it, and I will do that again. So let's see. Now you are again with the power.
Okay, I will share the entire screen. And now you
perfect. It was working first.
Oh, it's working now.
Yeah, now it's perfect.
Yeah, sorry.
Let's do it.
Thank you, Anna. Just a precision. I was the president and the secretary of the Mexican Society for Coral Reefs, so I stopped this duty like 2 years ago. I'm happily working just in my science now.
Lucky man.
My talk is about coral reefs, as you discussed yesterday, one of the most famous animal forests, not the only one, indeed. And I will be mainly talking about the geo ecological functions or the physical functionality of coral reefs. Just to start, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with these systems, but why coral reefs are important? They are the largest living physical structure on our planet. It's not just because of the corals, it's because of the symbiosis with the zooxanthellae or dinoflagellates. Sergio Rossi talked about this symbiosis yesterday, so I will not talk much about it. They are the most biologically diverse systems in our seas. This is because we have a lot of structure that can harbor a lot of species, as Sergio Flotter was mentioning just now. But from a human point of view, they are really, really important as well. More than 500 million people rely on coral reefs for food and for a way of livelihood. And they provide really important environmental or ecosystem services like coastal protection. And all these benefits that we receive from
Lorenzo, we lost your sound, your voice, or just for me?
No, we lost it.
I can't hear it. I can't hear.
Lorenzo, can you listen us? Yeah, I think Lorenzo is coming. Oh, okay. Let's see, Lorenzo, we lost your presentation. I think you have connection problems. Lorenzo, okay, I will just. Lorenzo, can you listen to me? Seems Lorenzo can't listen us. How to connect with Lorenzo? Oh, a good day. Lorenzo, your presentation was down. He was not seeing what we are saying or listening, or let's see, how can we connect with Lorenzo? I will remove Lorenzo. Okay, this is the best way. Sorry, guys. This is some way to try to fix the connection of Lorenzo again. And Lorenzo have a problem as a schedule in the end of the afternoon. Well, while Lorenzo is coming again, let's see if Lorenzo is coming. I think, I don't know if Lorenzo take too long to come back. I think we have problems with Lorenzo's connections or connection. Daniel, or do you want to provide your presentation? Are you ready, or some of you?
I might jump in. I'm Paolo,
Yes.
if
Yes.
needed.
Paolo, yeah, are you ready? Just
Yeah.
because I think Lorenzo had a big problem there because he was not listening us, and then he just suddenly dropped.
Yeah.
Oh, things. Pandemic. The next time we need to have a presential event with everything we deserve.
Yeah,
But it's
I guess it's something all of us, we want.
Yeah, of course. So I will transform your function, then you can present your PowerPoint and everything else. So I think now will work. Thank you, Paolo. And while that, we're gonna continue trying to reconnect with Lorenzo.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move forward to our presentation, and now it will be given by Dr. Paolo Vassallo. He is a professor at University of Genoa, and his research are about ecological modeling and functioning. His lecture for today is Ecosystem Services of the Marine Animal. We are ready.
Okay, I guess you are looking at my presentation now. Hopefully
Yes,
in
we can
full mode.
see full mode. Yeah.
Okay.
Everything's
So
perfect.
good. Good morning or good evening to everybody. It depends on where you are. I'm talking you about a little bit about the concept of ecosystem services. Just touching the concept of marine animal forests, because I'm working on the application of the methodologies you will see today, but I still don't have any reliable results to show at the moment. By the way, in the title of my presentation, we are talking about ecosystem services, which are defined as, well, are defined in many different ways, but are in general defined as the benefits that nature may provide to humans. And this definition is, well, in nature, really anthropocentric, an anthropocentric definition that I do not like that much, because I am an ecologist indeed. But I use the locution ecosystem services because it's like an icebreaker expression. I mean, everybody nowadays talk about ecosystem services and the importance of ecosystem services and the importance to preserve the ability of nature to provide ecosystem services. What is more interesting by my side is that the concept of ecosystem services is useful to open the way to the evaluation of the value of nature and natural components. There's another little problem in the concept of ecosystem services and its application is that we as humans are used to cope the concept of value with an economic concept. So for us, in general, when we talk about value, we in our mind, we have the idea that we are talking about economic value or monetary value, which is even worse. This is something we have to cope when we talk about ecosystem services, and you will see later in this presentation that we also develop methodologies that are able to provide a monetary value to the natural value, but this is not an exchange value, so it's not the value I have to pay to, compensate a damage or to buy a piece of nature. It's just a way to talk to people about the value in a language that is generally understood. By the way, when I talk about ecosystem services and providing economic value or an economic evaluation to nature, to my colleagues, especially the ecological colleagues, they ask me, why are you doing this? Well, in general, it is because everybody is talking about ecosystem services, not just among scientists or among the society, but also in the international environmental policies are talking about ecosystem services and the importance to preserve the ability of nature to provide ecosystem services. And you will see a couple of examples in the next slides. Moreover, talking about the value of nature, so being able to provide the value to the nature or to a natural component, is a powerful tool to communicate the importance of nature. So it is useful to break the wall between the scientists and the policymakers, for example, or the scientists and the territory managers, and so on and so forth. And finally, when we talk about, for example, a damage to a natural system, translate this damage in a monetary value, in an economic equivalent, has the power to, open the ears of the auditors and let the message go from the science sphere to the public and to the general awareness. Just yesterday, I have made a very brief research about the Brazilian strategies referred to the environmental condition, and I have found, for example, the biodiversity strategy of Brazil, and in the third page, in the forward section of this manual, you may read at the fourth rows of the forward of this document that we are talking about ecosystem services. And later on in the very same document, you will go through the concept of payment for ecosystem services, need to preserve ecosystem services, and that's what I was talking about. It is something that it is coming into the international policies and the way the policymakers are talking about environment. So we need to talk the very same languages to be on the same page and work on the same direction. Leaving Brazil and getting to the European community, for example, we have again a biodiversity strategy which talks a lot about ecosystem services. We have an entire target of the biodiversity strategies in Europe, which is referred to restore and maintain ecosystem and their services. In this strategy, we can read that we need a map to assess the state of ecosystems and the services provided. And we do need to provide economic value of such services. So we are talking exactly of the need to translate the ability of nature to provide well-being into an economic equivalent. Italy itself, where I do work and live, has developed a strategy for biodiversity, which talks about ecosystem services. And in the last 5-6 years, Italy is publishing every year a relation regarding the natural capital states in the nation. And a lot of the methodologies we will see today are reported also into this natural capital report every year here in Italy. I was talking about ecosystem services and the anthropocentric concept of the ecosystem services, and I do say so because ecosystem services is just an object within a more complex paramount of relationships. And so we have ecosystem services in between of this, scheme of relationships, which is called the ecosystem service cascade, which starts at the very beginning with the natural capital, which is indeed the overall complexity of a system made of biotic and abiotic components, made of relationship between components, and so on and so forth. Natural capital, which is somehow the asset we have in our natural system, is able to provide a lot of different ecosystem functions. Ecosystem functions are the functions that natural capital maintains just to keep itself alive or healthy or functioning indeed. And so ecosystem functions may or may not be useful for humans. For example, a marine natural capital may provide different fish stocks, but some of these fish stocks may not have any value for the human beings or direct value for the human beings. Among these huge, generally very huge set of ecosystem functions, we as humans have the ability to perceive some of these functions as useful for us. And those are the ecosystem services. And so, for example, among every different fish stocks provided by the natural capital via the ecosystem functions, we collect some species, which are the ecosystem services, for example, for feeding ourselves. And then those ecosystem services may have, have benefits, which is, for example, the pleasure of eating a good plate of fish, and finally may or may not have even an economic value, a value on the economic system, which is the market value. If, for example, this fish may be cooked or consumed, is sold to a customer. So this is a very complex and articulated relationship, starting from the natural capital and getting to the market, so to the classical economic evaluation of the value. But every single step of this ecosystem service cascade has its own value. And we need to understand these values and quantify these values to get to the overall picture of the total value of the natural system. So we need to evaluate the natural capital, the ecosystem functions, the ecosystem services, and finally the socio-economic system with benefit and market, which are all, participating to the overall value of the natural system. In general, we are used to think about a complex relationship, or indeed a conflictual relationship between ecology and economy. But in this way of looking at the evaluation, ecology and economy has to join the evaluation, because ecology is pretty good at evaluating the value from natural capital till the evaluation of ecosystem services, while economy is very good at working at the opposite direction, so starting from the market and reaching the ecosystem services. So if we want the complete picture of the evaluation, we do need ecological applications for the left side of this ecosystem service cascade, and we do need economic applications for the right side of the ecosystem service cascade. And if we are able to merge those two different evaluations, we will have the overall picture of the value of the natural system. Within this ecosystem service cascade, well, it is even more complicated by the presence of pressures, impact management systems, and policies, and so on and so forth, which are there to modify the relationship of the ecosystem service cascade and may have huge impact on the overall value of the system that have to be accounted and taken into consideration for a environmentally sound management of the value of nature. Talking about the left side of the ecosystem service cascade, so the ecological approach for the evaluation of the first 2 or 3 steps of the ecosystem service cascade, we do need a donor side perspective. So we do need to evaluate how much value nature puts into the creation of the natural capital and the maintaining of these ecosystem functions, and in turn the providing of the ecosystem services. And to do so, well, starting from the what is written within the report of the TIB, the Economic of Ecosystem and Biodiversity, we do need biophysical approaches for the evaluation of the first 3 steps, 2 or 3 steps of the ecosystem service cascade. And these biophysical approaches are based on the production cost. So we have to account how much the natural capital has cost, how much the ecosystem functions, maintenance costs, and so on and so forth. And to relate the concept of the cost of production to the natural system, we do need to understand the biophysical processes that are exploited to generate the asset, so the natural capital, and to maintain the functioning, and so the natural functions. There's a bunch, not that much, but a few different methodologies to assess the biophysical costs of production. And one of these methodologies is energy analysis. Here below you have the link to the International Energy Society website, which is pretty interesting. And energy analysis is a methodology, an accounting methodology developed by Howard Odum back at the beginning, at the end of the 80s, the last century. And it's a thermodynamic-based methodology, which is exactly developed to account under a single unit of measure and under a single language the cost of production of a good, of a service, of a function, or of an object, or so to say. And energy is able to translate all the different costs of production of a system or maintenance of a system under a very single unit of measure, which is the energy, or better, the solar energy, directly or indirectly used, consumed to generate that product. In the end, it is, well, in this way, energy is able to account under a very single umbrella or accounting system all the costs of production, which is exactly what we need to account for the natural capital or ecosystem functions and ecosystem services. And finally, it is also possible to translate the energy value into monetary terms, so to speak the very same language of the other side of the coin or other side of the ecosystem service cascade, so the economic side of the ecosystem service cascade. How do energy application works, and specifically how can we apply ecosystem energy application to marine animal forest or a natural system? Well, we have to account on the resources used by the system to get to the condition we have today and to maintain the condition that we have today. And one of the systems, this system we have developed to do so, is to account for the primary productivity which has been used to get to the complexity we see today. So we have to reckon the different components of the system. So, for example, different species within a system. For each species, we have to understand its complexity in terms of trophic level or trophism. And this provides us the possibility to account for the primary productivity that was at the basis of the trophic pyramid maintaining the system. And so, for example, the primary productivity needed is to a system is made of the sum of the biomass of each species within the system multiplied by 10 to the trophic level minus 1 of each single species. In this way, which is a formula, this one is a formula proposed by Pauli and Christensen in 1995, we account for the total productivity that has been used to get to the natural capital we see today. Not only we have the primary productivity in terms, for example, of gram of carbons that has been used, but also we can translate this concept into the time that has been used to generate that primary productivity. So we have two information from this translation to primary productivity. We have the quantity of primary productivity consumed and the time that has been used to produce that primary productivity. In this way, we can account all the inputs that has been used by the system to get to the complexity we have today. And that is, for example, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus as main nutrients to the system that we have stored in the biomass and in the primary productivity used to get to the biomass. And then we have natural resources such as sun, rain, wind, tides, waves, runoff, currents, and so on and so forth, that impacted on the system during the time of formation of the primary productivity used. In this way, we may account for the total energy of the system. And as a final step, as I mentioned before, we can translate all of these the total energy of the system into a monetary equivalent. This is made by a conversion based on the ratio between the energy of a certain geographical region and the GDP produced in this region, but we have also other different way of translating the energy into monetary equivalent. By the way, we are not changing the concept of the analysis. We are just translating the energy application, the energy meaning, into a different language, which is more easily communicated and which is more powerful and generally understandable to everybody. That's for the donor side approach. So from left to right the cascade. Then we need something that is able to account for the service cascade, so the economic side of the ecosystem service cascade. And here we have a lot of different methodologies which fall within the concept of the ecological economics. And we have well, many different methodologies which are devoted or suited to account for different aspects of the value of the benefits that we as humans have from the natural system. Methodologies are well reckoned in different ways. For example, revealed preferences or stated preferences, which is based on the behavior of the users or the way of the users think about the natural systems. Well, I'm not an expert on this field, which is more an economic field of the research, but I do cooperate with colleagues able to apply methodologies so to get to a final, complete, overall evaluation of the value of the natural system. A few years ago, we have published a study about the overall ability of the marine animal forest to provide ecosystem services, or better, the overall ecosystem service cascade of the marine animal forest. And here we have a scheme table of different components of the ecosystem service cascade applied to marine animal forest, and you may see how complex and how variegate is the ability of such a system to provide different components of natural capital, different ecosystem functions, different ecosystem services, and finally different aspects of well-being for humans. Every single element of this very complex scheme has to be evaluated with the correct evaluation procedure, and the overall value is the sum of all these different little pieces of value provided by the marine animal forests. What is also useful, if I have a few minutes, yes, a couple of minutes again, still on my side, what is useful once you have an overall scheme such as the one I have shown you, is that you may apply environmental accounting procedures. So you have a certain, let's say, a similitude with what happens with your bank account. You have some savings, and then you have income, for example, salary of interest, which go to increase the saving, and also you have, unluckily, you have expenditures, and you have to balance among income and expenditures and outcomes, so to stay with a constant, at least a constant assets. And the very same is true for the natural system, with the natural capital, which is our asset, and the ecosystem functions, which are the interests of this natural capital, the ability of nature to eventually increase the natural capital. But you also have human activity and human needs, which in general are outcomes from the natural capital. So we have impacts, we have withdrawal, we have harvesting, and so on and so forth. And if we are able to translate everything under the very same language, we may apply the very same approach as the economic approach for our saving our bank account. And so we may say, we may know if we are losing natural capital, keeping our natural capital at least stable, or eventually increasing our natural capital, which is indeed a pretty good approach to be taken. well, I would say that I may stop here, and I would be happy to answer any possible question at the right moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulo. It was wonderful. Again, our brains is almost boiling inside my head, or at least my brain. Okay, Lorenzo is back, I think. Lorenzo, how are you?
Hi, sorry, I didn't. Sorry. 1 minute.
If you are, Lorenzo is going to Cancun. I also want to go.
I didn't notice that my presentation was lost, so I just kept talking until the end, and then
you lost your presentation after we lost your voice, and after we lost everything.
Okay, sorry.
If you want to try again, please, let's do it.
You want to so basically you didn't hear anything. I start from the beginning.
Yeah, you need to start. Well, you said that was not anymore president of Mexican, etc. And after that,
right. Wow. Well, I will try to repeat this thing a little bit faster because I have to go to a meeting. But I will try. If you give me the access to
okay, is with you, but we don't have your. If you want to keep your camera off, maybe it will help with the speedness, well, with the quality of the transmission too. Okay. But if you wanna, you can turn on your camera and let's do it. The floor is yours.
So you see my camera and see the presentation, right?
Presentation, or yes, just now we have the edit mode.
Okay, you see the whole thing now.
Yes, now it's perfect.
Hopefully now it works. I'm sorry for that. I didn't realize, so I will repeat the whole presentation again. Once
sorry.
It's for me and now it's for you. So I will be talking about coral reefs, one of the most important animal forests. And basically, I'm going to talk about the Geo Ecological Functions. Basically, this is the balance between production and erosion in coral reefs. But first, why coral reefs are important? They are the largest living physical structures in our planet. This is not just because corals itself, but because of the symbiosis with the dinoflagellates or zooxanthellae. Sergio Rossi talked about them yesterday, so I will not expand on this, but it's not just corals, it's this symbiosis, which is really important. Then, coral reefs are the most biological diverse systems in our seas, basically because of that structure provided by corals. But from the human point of view, more than 500 million people rely on coral reefs for the food and livelihood. And they also provide really important environmental or ecosystem services, such as coastal protection. And everything relies in these organisms, the corals. And corals are basically organisms that accumulate calcium carbonate. They produce rock. What we see in the photo are just a thin layer of the organisms that is covering a rock, which we know as coral skeletons. And so what are the key geoecological functions that we can find in a coral reef? But it's basically a structural complexity, which is related to diversity, this harbors diversity. We also have reef aggression, the capacity of reefs to grow in ecological, but more importantly, in geological times. This is linked to tracking sea level rise. This is also linked to coastal protection. And another key process which is related with production, but is also very related with the destructive forces, is the production of sediments or sand production. So basically, if we want to understand these geoecological functions, We need to understand the production, the producers, the ones that are producing calcium carbonate, which are corals, but also some secondary producers like crustose coralline algae or CCAs. And we need to know what is happening as well with the destruction forces. The destruction forces, there are some organisms like parrotfish, urchins, and sponges, and many others. But we also have physical erosion, for example, the impacts of hurricanes, of tropical storms, or we have chemical dissolutions. And it's the balance of everything which will give us the net balance of the reef budget, which is basically, if it's positive, the reef will grow. If it's negative, the reef will start eroding or flattening. So to understand a little bit this, I think it's really important to put in a context what is happening with the production side, with the corals. And this is a very famous graph that was produced almost 20 years ago now, which is representing the decline of corals in the Caribbean Sea. Similar trends had been described for many other regions in the world, in which some similarities in the rate of decline is present. I just wanted to point out with my photos the velocity of this change. So I born in 1977. I was a baby when the average coral reef in the Caribbean had about 55% of coral. I was doing my primary school when the average reef in the Caribbean had already 20 or 25% of coral cover, half of the coral cover that existed when I was born. And I was doing my undergrad when coral reefs had about 10 to 12%. So this is when I was a student, this happened, and it's really, really amazing the velocity that an ecosystem basically can collapse, no? But it's not just coral cover decline, it's also changes in the composition of the corals that live in those reefs. Basically, in this paper, what we try to show is that not all corals are equal. We have different types of different strategies of corals, as in many other groups of organisms. We have, in the example of corals, we have big branching corals that tend to grow really fast. We have small encrusting corals that are more resistant to some environmental conditions, and they tend to be named as weedy or opportunistic corals. So accompanying the declining in coral cover, we also see changes in the community composition. And this is basically we're seeing that some really important major reef building corals are declining because they are susceptible to diseases, to climate change, or to other stresses. And we are seeing increases in the relative abundance of these weedy, more resistant or opportunistic corals. And we can see this in this photo. This is from the Mexican Caribbean, in which basically what we see is a lot of coral skeletons that are collapsed. Those skeletons were from acroporas that probably died 20, 30 years ago. They erode, they weaken, and then collapse. But over these collapsed structures, we see lots of small patches. These are Poraites astreoides, these encrusting corals. And although the coral cover might be a little bit high, 30% in this particular photo, we can see that the structure and the amount of calcium carbonate that is being accumulated by these corals is not the same as it was before, dominated by different corals, the acroporas. And we actually measured that. So we studied these reefs in Puerto Morelos, where I live, here in the north of the Mexican Caribbean, very close to Cancun. And we used data from a colleague that collected data 40 years ago in two reef zones. One zone was the fore reef, which is exposed to a lot of energy, a lot of water energy, and another zone was the back reef. which is a more protected environment. And we found that the communities that live in these two different conditions were different, composed by different coral species, which is something that you might expect in lots of ecosystems. Think, for example, in a mountain. As you climb the mountain, you will see that the composition of a species will change, but you will see also that the structure of the ecosystem will change with these changes in the environmental conditions. This is exactly what we found in 1985 in the reefs of Puerto Morelos. Then we went back in 2016 and we did the same surveys, and we found basically that the communities were homogenizing. This is, they were becoming more similar. We couldn't see these drastic and very diametral differences. They were very similar. And the second point is that they were very similar in that they were dominated by small encrusting corals. So they were similar, but in not the very more positive way. So what are the functional consequences of these shifting coral assemblages? Well, basically, I'm using here two key attributes of what we understand is the physical functionality of coral reefs, which is one is the reef rugosity, or basically the complexity. How complex is the ecosystem? Structurally complex. And the other is the coral community composition. How much carbonate, calcium carbonate, the corals that live in any given reef can produce a year. And in both cases, we see a positive relationship. This is that as you increase coral cover, you will have more complex reef and you will have more carbonate production. However, the rate of these increases depends on the organisms, the species that are dominating the system. In this case, in this example, the blue lines represent the orbicellas, big mountain corals, and the green lines represents the porites, small encrusting corals. So you have a completely different effect, even though all the groups are corals. And we actually model this. We basically model how changes in the coral community composition might affect community calcification and reef rugosity over time. At the top of this figure, basically you will see different species that we model how abundant, the relative abundance of these different species over time, and we model what happened in two different scenarios. The first scenario is a more realistic scenario in which coral cover declines from 50 to 10%, but also the composition of corals changes. So we started with a coral reef with 50% of acropora, and we ended up with 10% of a reef dominated by agaricia and encrusting corals. And what happened with reef rugosity and community calcification? Well, as expected, they decline very rapidly. However, what happened in a different scenario? We start with just a reef with 10% of coral cover, but all the corals were acropora, really important for complexity and community calcification, and we increase the amount of corals that we have, but we move from a reef dominated by acropora to a reef dominated by encrusting small corals. And what happened is that community calcification and reef rugosity basically did not change over time. And this is just to represent how important is not just the amount of corals, but the identity of those corals. And basically, this is the conceptual framework, very simple to understand what is happening in a coral community. Basically, we have different species, and we need to see what happens with these three key elements of all these species. Calcification rate, how much calcium carbonate they are producing, structural complexity, how complex are these corals, and how abundant they are. Usually, we measure this in coral reefs as coral cover. We also try to understand, this is real data from the Mexican Caribbean, what happened when coral cover increases? It's not just what happened with coral declines, as we know that is happening, and the shifts in community composition, but also what happens in the reefs that we know that coral cover is recovering. In most of the cases, it's a relatively small increase, but it's recovering. So we went to all these sites and see what happened between 2005 and 2018. And you will see it's matched. So the gray dot in the map is matched with the dots in the figure B. And basically, green dots represents increases in coral cover for each of these sites. You will see that actually in most of the sites, we found coral cover increases. We have more corals than in 2005. However, when we measure reef functionality with the same context, that how complex corals are, how much calcification, and how abundant they are, what we found is that the rates of increase of reef functioning is way less. And we have a mismatch or a recovery disparity between the coral cover and the reef functionality. And this is given again because the identity of the species that are promoting the recovery are species that are not important from the physical functionality point of view. This has been shown as well in geological times. This study basically describes how coral communities were 40 to 80,000 years ago in the Florida Keys, and they describe that most of the corals were dominated by really important corals, Acroporas, Orbicella, Sombrane corals, and the same sites in the present between 1990s and 2000s were completely different, where they are dominated by these Poraitos asteroides or other weedy species that are more tolerant to some sources of stress. So the key message in this part is that the identity of corals is really important to understand their role in the ecosystems. And I just did this meme to try to exemplify this. So we have, oversimplify this, we have two types of corals, these corals that are really important reef building corals, and we have other corals that are more like not really important from the functionality point of view. And if we want to see how reefs were in the past compared with the present, this was 40, 50 years ago, and this is how they look now, no? But it's not just about production, it's also about erosion, as I mentioned before. So what happened with the processes, the biological processes that are eroding reefs? And we did this example, this study using very similar sites that the ones I mentioned before, and we track what happened between 2004 and 2018 with production site corals and CCAs, what happened with erosion, and what is the net balance between these two processes. As you might expect, production, this is the amount of calcium carbonate that is produced by the system, has not changed. This is because even though we have some increases in coral cover, these increases are not positive, are not really impacting the production. This number, which is 2G, means 2 kilograms of calcium carbonate per year per square meter. Just as a context, healthy coral reef in the past is usually described to have about 10 kilograms of calcium carbonate per year per square meter. So it's 5 times more what we are seeing now. But basically it's unchanged, no? In the other side, erosion, we identified a declining trend. This was a little bit unexpected. So we have less erosion today than we had 15 years ago. And obviously, if we have production is not changing, erosion is declining, the net balance is artificially saying that the carbonate budget is increasing. But these increases are not the way that we would like to see them, because we would like that carbonate budget is increasing because we have more production, we have more corals, but this is not the case. What we've seen is that it's artificially increasing because we are losing some erosion on our reefs. And to identify what was happening, we model what was happening with all these elements that integrate the equation of a reef budget, the producers, and the eroders. And we found that the only organism or group of organisms that were actually declining over time were parrotfish. And parrotfish were declining in size, were declining in different functional groups, and actually the functional group that was more affected was the excavators, which are the most important bioeroders on a reef, and it was changing in the numbers of the individuals that we found over time. So basically, in 2000, we have more parrotfish and bigger parrotfish compared to 2018, and this explains why we are losing some erosion in our reefs. Why we are losing parrotfish? Well, one of the most evident answers would be fishing. However, in Mexico, parrotfish fisheries is not really important. So fishing might be occurring, but it's probably mostly because of bycatch or poaching targeting large individuals. Another element here is the feedback effect between the losses of habitat and the impacting the amount of parrotfish that can live on the reef. So this might be a negative retroalimentation. However, we also have an interesting paradigm here. Some of you might know that parrotfish are really important in the concept of promoting resilience. Basically because they eat macroalgae. They are also really important herbivores. So they eat macroalgae, and the logic behind that is they open spaces for corals. However, as we see here, they are also eroding reefs that are not in a good shape. All the reefs that I mentioned in all these different studies, at the end, they are degraded reef. They are reefs that are not in the pristine or the natural condition. So in a degraded reef, increases in parrotfishes might be boosting rates of erosion, and this might impact the structure of a coral. So with that, I don't want to say that we shouldn't protect parrotfish. We indeed must protect parrotfish. However, we need to consider that this is a more complex equation, and we need to see what is happening in different elements of the system, and not just taking one element and expect that this single element will facilitate or promote resilience. I did not talk much about the drivers of these changes, basically because I suppose that this has been discussed many times before my talk, and many of these threats are actually shared by different systems in different parts of the world. We have climate change, we have overfisheries, we have overpopulation. In the case of the Mexican Caribbean, coastal pollution, coastal eutrophications are really important. But the point that I want to make here is not just to try to identify one threat, it's just the network of different acting threats which is putting our system on risk. We need to see this. We need to see that this is a multiple threats scenario. It's not just one or two single threats acting in different ways. And I'm going to conclude the talk just pointing out that, yes, we need to focus on local scale things, for example, restoring ecological process, herbivory, for example, or restoring population, like planting corals, coral restoration. However, if we want that these actions had an effect, we need to focus on providing the local environmental conditions that are optimal for those species or those ecosystems. For example, if corals died in the first place because we have a problem with eutrophication and we just plant corals in the same conditions, but it's very likely that corals will die again. What we need to do is plant corals because we might need to do some active restoration activities. However, we need to focus also in improving the conditions that favor the decline of corals. And obviously this and a whole new thing now, or well, we need to consider this whole new thing a global threat which is affecting all ecosystems in the world, which is climate change and global warming. And so we need to understand these three level of actions if we actually want that our conservation or management actions have an effect on the ecosystems. And with that, I conclude. I hope that you hear me. Yes?
Yes, we are.
Thank you. I was afraid the whole talk that trying to see how I can check whether I was talking or not.
No, but we saw the whole presentation. It was a really nice presentation. Congratulations. And it is really mind-blowing when we see the velocity of how the corals are being damaged and how it affects other animals and all the ecosystem. It was really interesting to hear your lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. I will try to come back at the end, but I'm going to move to another meeting.
Okay, thank you very much for coming, and we will save the answers or the questions for you.
Yes, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. So the last, but not less important.
Here we are.
Yeah, that's it. Please. Thanks for coming. I will transform you in presentators. Let's do it. Thank you, guys.
Okay, so let's start our fourth presentation. It will be given by the PhD students Jacopo Borghese and Daniele Arduini. They are researchers at the University of Salento. The field of study of Mr. Borghese is taxonomical analysis of marine macroinvertebrates and ecological analysis of energy flows in an integrated multitrophic aquaculture systems. And the field of study of Mr. Arduini is fooling organisms for bioremediation purposes. Their lecture for today is entitled Integrated Multitrophic Aquaculture and Marine Animal Forest Restoration. Okay, guys, you're good to go when you're ready.
Okay. All right. Can you see the presentation?
Now I can't see the presentation anymore.
Can you see the presentation?
Yes, it's okay now.
Oh, okay, fine. All right. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Jacopo Borghese, and today, together with Daniele Arduini, we will talk about our experience in a Mediterranean inshore aquaculture plant, from production to restoration. So it might sound weird, the association between the term restoration with aquaculture, but we will get there later. So let's start with some bad news. So as you may know, our planet is not having a great time in the last centuries. This picture was made in 2008, and it shows that basically no area is unaffected by human influence. And the 40% of the marine compartment is strongly affected by human impacts. And this is due to the fact that human population is growing, and it's growing exponentially, as well as the necessity to exploit the resources to satisfy our needs. But these needs are increasingly affecting the environment worldwide. So in order to sustain more than 7 billion people on this planet, we are producing our food in a more intensive way. And this is the case for aquaculture. Aquaculture is basically the rearing, the cultivation of aquatic organisms, such as fishes, but also mollusks, crustaceans, algae, and others. And this activity is now fundamental for us because it now accounts for more than the 50% of the total fish that is used for food, for human consumption. And the fish consumption is increasing, and as well, aquaculture activity is increasing. There are three different typology of aquaculture related on where the plant is located. So we have the onshore plant that is land-based, where the plant it's in a controlled environment where you can manage all the effluents of the plant, and you can control the wastes of the aquaculture. Then the offshore plant, where the plant is located in the open sea, where there are strong currents, the site is not so easy to reach. And then the inshore plant, and we will focus on this one because it's close to the coast, like from 0 to 7 kilometers from the coast. They are located usually in confined environments, so the currents are not so strong. So it's possible to study the effect of the aquaculture plant on environment, and also trying to study some mitigation solution to the problems. So what are the impacts of aquaculture? Of course, the availability of space, mostly for the onshore and the inshore plant. Then the further production, because you have to know that the feeds are made by fish oil. So that's a huge problem, because in order to feed your animals, you need to deplete the fish stocks, and that's a problem. Then we have effects on wild populations, such as disease transfer and also gene transfer between the rear and the wild populations. And then the most direct impact of aquaculture, and the most studied impact, is the deposition of organic and inorganic matter on the sea bottom near the cages. And that's why we as Remedial Life Project, we developed an IMTA system in order to mitigate this problem of aquaculture. So we are not talking anymore to a monoculture, but we are considering a polyculture, where we put different organisms belonging to different trophic levels in association with the fishes. So in a plant where we rear sea bass and sea bream, we associate mollusks such as Mytilus galloprovincialis, the spongy Sarcotragus spinosulus, the polychaetes Sabella spallanzani, and the macroalgae Gracilaria bursa pastoris and Chetomorphalinum. So all these organisms are filter feeders, and the invertebrates can filter the seawater, taking the organic matter from the environment, while the macroalgae can uptake the inorganic compounds from the plant. So the fish feces and uneaten feed are useful building the biomass of our invertebrates and avoiding the accumulation of these substances on the sea bottom. Our plant is located in the south of Italy, in the Marcando of Taranto, and the plant is divided into two different sites. The control site, where there are only the fish cages, and the treatment site, where there are the fish cages surrounded by our long lines, where we put natural fiber coconut ropes in the water, and we rear our invertebrates all around the cages. But why are we doing this? Of course, because we want to mitigate the environmental impact of aquaculture, but also because we want to produce a valuable biomass as byproduct, because we want to involve companies to develop our system. And we know that no company will invest their money to save the planet without an economical return. But let's focus on the mitigation of the impacts. We studied the macrozoobenthos under the cages because the macrozoobenthi community is made by different species belonging to different ecological groups related to their different degree of tolerance of a progressive increase in stress. And the stress in our case is the high organic content in the sediment. So in that way, studying the macrozoobenthi community, the abundance and the composition of the community, it's possible to assess the environmental quality status. So here we are the results. So on the top, in July 2018, so before the placement of the invertebrates that we call bioremediators, it's clear that the treatment site was really impacted by the aquaculture. And that's why we put our invertebrates in that area, because the main current of the site brings all the wastes in that area. So after 1 year of the placement of our bioremediators, the situation changes completely, and the treatment site became similar to the control one. And last year, in the treatment site was even better the situation than the control site. And these results are referred only on the soft bottom sediments. Now I will let Daniele speak about the rocky bottom. So thank you.
Okay. Hi everyone. Of course, we have conducted analysis also on the hard bottom communities of the bottom communities under the cages, and as you can see, and we observed a recovery in terms of number of species, as you can see in the graph that represents the number of species in relation with the different sample periods. We found before the beginning of our treatment, in summer 2018, we found 40 species, and after just 1 year of experiment in summer 2019, the number of species doubled, reaching about 80 species, and then increased again in the summer 2020, reaching about 100 species. The most represented taxon were porifera and tunicates mainly. The situation in the control area remained quite constant during our experiment. So we have observed an increasing of biodiversity with a total of 130 taxa found, and this biodiversity is mainly due different new sessile species, mainly sponges, that could benefit from the better conditions. For example, the less sedimentation rate or the less organic load arriving on the sea bottom. And also a number of associated agile species that in turn could find shelter or food within the structuring species. In the figure you can see several ascidians or branchioma is a polycate. So we have found a better situation after just 1 year. And on our collectors, we found a comparable number of species, in particular on collectors used for collecting polychaetes. Because how we have collected polychaetes? Basically, we use as collector, we use bare ropes that, and we let the succession, the ecological succession, took its course, because Sabella is an important component of the fouling community of the study area in Taranto. So after 1 year of colonization, we got an efficient filtering system with, as you can see in the figure, mussels at the surface, in a dominance of mussels, Nitidus gallo provincialis, at the surface in the first meters, and then the polychaete Sabella spallanzani became dominant deeper. And in this way, Sabella, that represent in my opinion, the most suitable organism for this activity, because it is characterized by an high clearance rate, more than mussels. And moreover, in this position, under the mussels, Sabella was able to catch even the pseudophases of mussels and removing them completely from the system. In fact, Sabella does not produce wastes, using them for building their tube, its tube. We got this polyculture system in a very easy way and at low cost. In fact, it was enough to buy 80 ropes and put them into the sea and and wait for the colonization of fouling organisms. So in this way, we may transform a problem for all the submerged structure in a resource. Our meaning for bioremediated the water column. And this system fits in the philosophy of the circular economy because the minimizing of wastes. Actually, the wastes can be transformed in valuable biomass, in our case, seaweeds, sponges, mussels, or polychaetes. And what is impressive for us is the production of worms, of polychaetes, of sabella, that in 1 year, so that's starting from bare collectors, so completely empty, we obtained 1,000 kilos of biomass. And what we produced, our organism, our biomasses, can be used in several fields. For example, from seaweeds or sponges, several bioactive compounds can be extracted, while sabella can be used as fish baits or ornamental organisms for aquaria. We are investigating the different markets. Anyway, beside the market value essential to sell our products, we may add a big environmental value. Actually, the two values are not always mutually exclusive. And anyway, our structure can be assimilated to artificial reefs already used for restoration. Key examples are the restoration of coral reefs in tropical waters, and the restoration, for example, of Posidonian beds in the Mediterranean Sea. So the goal of restoration is restoring the structural component of the ecosystem so that the biodiversity and the ecological services are ensured. And our structure mimic hard substrates, so enhancing the settlement of several structuring species, and so recovering the ecosystem functioning. For example, they're very important. These organs are very important in improve the water quality or providing suitable habitat for many marine organisms, and in sequestrating huge amount of CO2 from the atmosphere. We have realized a kind of marine animal forest, in my opinion, as you can see the figure here, a beautiful marine animal forest, and that can also attract tourists for its beauty. We think that the IMTA system, if carefully planned and coupled with the restoration, could represent a practical way to balance environmental, economic, and social sustainability. Thank you for your attention. This is our structure. And a special thanks go to our professor and as well as coordinator of the project, Adriana Giangrande.
Thanks a lot, guys. Was really very interesting. Wonderful talk. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I would like to invite all presenters, everybody to come to our round table. Then we can start to answer 1,000 questions we have.
Yes.
That's it. Well,
do you want me to start the questions?
Yes, please. I was just waiting a bit to see if Paolo come with us. Lorenzo is not here yet. Sergio, I'm not sure. So Please, Anna, let's do it.
Okay, so let's start our discussion sessions. I'm going to read the questions that our participants sent, and I want you all to feel free to answer and comment on all of the questions, okay? We have lots of compliments to all of our presenters, people saying that it was a great talk, it was amazing. So I'm going to focus now on the question. Our first question was made by Dr. Sergio Rossi, and it is a question for Sergio Floeta. Is there any study about marine forests in which there is clear distinction about the abundance of different life stages of the same species related with the forest?
I'm not sure if Sergio is with us. Are you with us, Sergio? Like a spirit. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can move forward to the next question.
Yes,
or,
please. Just because I think the name of Sergio here is just a ghost.
Okay, so let me see here. Another for Sergio Rossi. He said that Paolo, what a terrific presentation, very well. And he's also saying Lorenzo is not here, right?
No.
So I'm gonna go this one for Danielle and Jacopo, okay? What kind of limitation this kind of technique could find in other environments as Brazilian marine coast?
Okay, thanks for the question. I think that, of course, this system we have realized it works very well in Taranto, where we, as a group of study, we have investigated the fouling of the area, and also Adriana Giangrande is an expert of Sabella spallanzani, so he knows everything of Sabella spallanzani. That is a species very suitable for this experiment. I think that knowledge of the fouling and the characteristics, like for example clearance rate or time of the reproduction period, is essential to drive the fouling where you want. I hope it's clear.
And the hydrodynamic, I'm a bit worried about the structure, you see? How is the place where the structure is right now? It's very calm bay, or?
It's very calm. It's in a confined environment, so there are not so strong currents, and this is essential if you want to study the dynamics, the fluxes of energy in the system. In the open sea is more difficult, of course. So in a confined environment, it will be perfect to establish a system like that.
So, Anna, do we have more questions? If not, I would like to pose questions to you all.
We have more questions, but if you want
Please.
to do your question first.
No.
Okay.
First, the question that is coming from chat.
Okay, so the next one is for Danielle. Do you think these filter feeders may be used as bioremediators for microplastics?
Thanks, Sergio, for the question. I think, yes, we are investigating, of course, the problem. And once again, Sabella is very suitable for this, for removing everything from the water column and then putting the tube. So the microplastics that we are studying, the clearance with respect to several components of the water column. I think yes.
Nice, really interesting.
So
I have another one for Jacopo. For the blue carbon, how can we enhance the growth with IMTA?
The blue carbon, the growth of what? Sorry, I understand the question.
Yeah, I'm gonna read it again, but The question literally says, Jacopo, for the blue carbon, how we can enhance the growth with IMTA? How are they related? The IMTA and the enhancement with the blue carbon?
I didn't get the meaning of blue carbon. I didn't get the question.
Well, let's move and wait for, maybe Sergio can clarify the question. But while Sergio is trying to translate it or clarify it, Paolo, ecosystem services is something that we, as you said, we are using a lot. Everybody uses it. But seems me that is not efficient because, man, we are running in a ascendant curve to 2 or 3 degrees of warming in the next decades. And how can we, using this or similar tools, how can we enhance communication with policymakers, stakeholders, just to try to change behaviors and, of course, actions?
Yeah, you're right. Everyone is talking about ecosystem services, but their usefulness is still to be proved. It is, from my perspective, it is a way of talking about nature. And every time we talk about nature and need to conserve, preserve, restore, or maintain the integrity of nature is still a good thing to do. By the way, what we are doing is still too little in respect of the changes we are facing. For example, the climate change, you mentioned it before. And still we have to understand how much nature is important for our well-being. And is still something, it is something we are starting to perceive in our daily lives. Stronger storm, warm waves, and fire everywhere, and glaciers which are disappearing, and so on and so forth. Everyone is experiencing a change in nature. Not necessarily those changes will generate a decrease in the ecosystem services. Surely they will change the set of ecosystem services we will have. Being extremely honest, there will be winners and losers due to the climate change. In the long run, we all will lose, but on the short run, there will be winners and losers. And it's a huge problem to manage, since, well, every policy has to be shared on a world basis, and it's a tricky question to be answered.
Paolo, your mic.
Sorry, mic is off. Yeah, but I think our students need to put their brains to boil, to burn, just because, man, we need it. Well, for example, to Brazilian students, we're gonna have a bite. They will sell 92 blocks of oil and gas in October 7th. It's just there. After that, we're gonna have more, around 20 billions of barrels of oil. The potential can be more. So, man, this will feed climate change like sweet. You see, it's something, it's a lot of, and just because in 2030, nobody wanna or will not deal with burn of fossil fuel. So they will burn very quickly all this volume. So yeah, we need to do something, and we need to create something. And this is something that must challenge, a kind of endeavor that the science must be committed to provide different answers. But that's it. We have a clarification from Sergio, and Sergio was asking, can we make the animals grow faster in relation to the previous question?
Okay. I mean, if you put more animals, more invertebrates in the water, you can absorb more carbon. I don't know if Sergio means that. So putting more invertebrates, more bioremediators, you will store more carbon from the system. How can we make the animals grow faster? I mean, the organisms take the organic and inorganic compound from the system. So, I mean, if you add more feeds, they can eat more, but there's no answer really for this.
But that's the point. I think if we feed this animal with more food, they can grow more. The question is try to avoid eventual impacts of this, all this organic matter in the environment. Everything must be very carefully understood and organized. So, have we more questions, Anna?
No, we don't have more questions.
Okay. Do you want to just last words, just to please feel free?
Yeah, so since we don't have any more questions, I really would like to thank you all to being here. It was a really nice and rich session, right? I hope everyone has enjoyed as much as I did. I really learned lots of things today. And I want to thank everyone in the organization. You're doing a great job. And thank you, everyone. I think that's it. Don't forget, we still have one more day of sessions tomorrow.
Yeah,
and
tomorrow
I
morning.
hope to see everyone tomorrow in the sessions.
Okay, Paolo, do you want to say something else? Just last words, just say goodbye, or anyway?
Yeah, I would say goodbye and thank you for your attention and the very interesting session of presentations.
Okay, thank you, Paolo. And Paolo, we're going to write to you, myself, the students, to try to put you on board, you all, of course, Danielle, and just to have a white paper, just to talk about exactly about that. I think we should provide something for nations to discuss this subject in the next COP26. Guys, do you want to say something else? Just say
goodbye to everyone. I want to thank you for the opportunity, of course, and it was a beautiful meeting.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you, everyone.
So, yeah, in the next time, please, let's do something presentially. And, well, you will be really very welcome in Brazil. And I'm going to Italy in the end of this year. I see you there.
Yeah.
I will disturb all of you.
You're welcome.
Sergio, welcome back from the light. We have a question for you. You arrived just in the end, in the last second. But I think we have time for you for your answer. Anna, do you want to present the question, please?
Oh, yes, I can. So the question for Sergio Floeter is there any study about marine forests in which there is clear distinction about the abundance of different life stages of the same species related with the forests?
Yes. As far as I understood the question, I think it is related to, for example, if there is different life stages of fish in algae beds, in mangroves related to the reefs. And the question is, yes, and there is some studies that shows that some species are only the juveniles first arrive in the mangroves and algae beds, and then they go to the reef. And there is the contrary too. Some fish are only the adults are in one place or the other. So, and this is most clear in the Caribbean, for example, that you have all these habitats. They are close together, closer than in Brazil, for example. In Brazil, generally, the reef is too far away from the mangroves. But we have this here too, but in the Caribbean and other places, we have this. And yes, we have studies of life stages in different parts of the marine forest.
Okay, thank you.
So if we don't have more questions, Sergio, do you have your final words? Your final words!
I think it's very interesting talks from yesterday, today, and tomorrow we'll have more. I congratulate you, Paulinho and Sergio Rossi, for putting this together. Very nice. And let's see if next year or the other we would really do it in person. Will be great.
Please, let's do something in person. Yeah, I miss hugs. But okay.
With all these Italian guys, we must hug each other.
Yeah, that's it. We need. Yeah, we need that. And well, again, we always need to remember. Thanks a lot for the students involved with this process and everybody that is behind the cameras and the WhatsApp. Guys, you can't imagine the amount of information that is running. We have, I think, the satellites, they are all busy with this event today. And I'm so sorry about the connection. I think the south of Brazil is really in the middle of thunderstorm, but I hope tomorrow will be another day and a better day. Please refresh your minds and be ready tomorrow morning. We're gonna be again together. See you tomorrow. Thanks a lot for coming. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
So, encerrei aqui a transmissão.